NIUA is a leading think tank of the country. The mandate of NIUA is very broad. It actually covers on all aspects of urban development and the urban growth of India.
NIUA is an ecosystem, an urban ecosystem. There is a comprehensiveness to NIUA in terms of the sectors that it deals with.
The founders were luminaries in their own right. They had anticipated that the institute should be working on capacity development for the urban sector, the training of professionals for cities, the economic aspects of cities, the challenges of infrastructure, the challenges of services. This had all been anticipated in 1976.
That was a very interesting time. All around there was some kind of interest developing in cities. It was at that time that Professor Ashish Bose and Professor P.V. Desai and Mr. Jagmohan, Mr. Bhagwan Sahai, they met and they said something which is neither the government nor the university type. We should set up an institute as a bridge.
All NIUA senior staff had to be versatile enough to move from one focus area to another.
Somebody was dealing with infrastructure, somebody was dealing with finance, somebody was dealing with water supply, environment, transport.
It also needed some people who had actually worked on cities. Mr. Bhuthalingam, who had just retired, but he was finance secretary, started chatting with Mr. Sayyid Al-Shafi, with Mr. P.L. Verma. So this is the kind of a group that came together and filed an application under the Societies Registration Act that an institute be set up. Three things we got as concession from the government. One, the permanency, the second, a regular grant, and third, this place where we are currently located. It was the 65th constitutional amendment, which gave to the institute a tremendous insight into how constitutions have to be amended in order to create a third tier of government. We got onto this one. We used to really start work at about 7:45 in the morning, and for the evening we just didn't know what time. There would be a message from the Prime Minister's office to the Ministry of Urban Development, and the Ministry of Urban Development passed on the message to us that by tomorrow morning we need to have this information.
The first research for the ULBs to assess whether they would be able to carry out the functions listed under 74th Constitutional Amendment was done by NIUA, which led to creating certain guidelines which the ULBs could follow and rectify and implement.
Then there was this National Commission on Urbanization with Charles Correa as the chairperson, and Mr. M.N. Butch, he was the vice chairman. And there were members like Ashish Bose and Fernandez and very well-known people, Alex Desai and Bilkis Shah, they were all members of the commission. While this initiative came from the Prime Minister, Ministry also wanted a quick thing to be done on the state of India's urbanization. They said, look, we should also have some document to be able to discuss with the Commission that this is where we are. Then you can move on, where do we want to go and how do we want to go. So they gave us a separate exercise to do, which is a publication that we have, State of India's Urbanization.
JNNURM was a flagship mission of the Ministry of Urban Development. At NIUA, we helped launch JNNURM. We did the appraisal of city development plans, and then till very recently we were monitoring the reforms.
There were 23 reforms which were to be carried out by states and urban local bodies, 10 by the states, 13 by the urban local bodies, and the grants was to be released by the central government based on the reform compliance of the states and the urban local bodies.
One of the big studies that we had done on the status of water supply, sanitation and solid waste management, it covered 300 cities and towns. It is a unique study in the sense that you could get the same piece of information across India for the same year for all these services. More recently, the HPEC work, this is High-Powered Expert Committee on Financing Infrastructure. The secretariat again was NIUA, where we gave inputs to the report. Everyone working in the urban sector quotes HPEC report saying that this kind of investment is required.
UNICEF was coming up with a large urban program, the Urban Basic Services. That gave us a completely different perspective of basic services, of inclusiveness, of slums, of women in distress and children in distress. We created a small unit within the NIUA to deal with these kinds of issues to that program.
Until then, the Planning Commission was largely looking at rural poverty because India's focus was rural. There was just a wee bit of talk, but there was no thrust on urban poverty. And now, of course, urban poverty is understood well and also understood as something a little different to rural poverty.
Urban poverty reduction strategy for 11 cities. This work was funded by the United Nations Development Programme UNDP under the broad umbrella called National Strategy for the Urban Poor. So it looked at basic infrastructure in terms of sanitation and services. And we cannot look at only services in isolation. So we also looked at livelihood aspects. So there was an action plan that was laid out for services as well as livelihood, so that looked at slums in totality. And at the same time, JNNERM was already launched, so this document also helped in augmenting the urban poor sections of the city development plans.
In 1990, the country was passing through a very, very difficult time, and the economic situation was extremely, extremely bad. But that was also the time when country had started opening up.
One of the most prominent projects to have happened in NIUA was the USAID sponsored FIRE-D project. It was a loan which was given by the US government for capacity building of cities, specifically in the water and sanitation sector.
It was the private sector's point of view. How do you commercialize urban services? We also thought that involving NIUA with FIRE projects, the commercialization issues, we should align ourselves with the new philosophy of the government that India should open up within the country as such.
We were working with local governments, really trying to tell them that government is not the only source of finance. You can go to the market, but for that you need to put your house in order. And then we changed the mindset at the government level.
This was one of the flagship projects under NIUA because it ran for almost 15 years. So under that, we took on a number of very important research. One was developing the manual for municipal accounting. That led to all the states developing their municipal accounting manual.
Basically, there are huge investment gaps in the cities for infrastructure development and operation and maintenance of services. An integrated reform approach is required to overcome governance and financial management issues. There is a need to strengthen the municipal finance, financial management and governance issues at the country and the state level, which requires a big capacity building at the states and ULBs level.
The Pearl project, the Peer Exchange and Reflective Learning project, and that is a solely capacity building project of 65 mission cities of JNURM, and Pearl has created that platform through which the cities have understood the concept of knowledge sharing.
So we clubbed these 65 cities into 5 or 6 groups. We appointed one knowledge manager and one convener for each group, so that different workshops, exposure visits and different ideas can be generated through each group, which can be disseminated across group also. We also published volumes of best practices. We also created a platform on the website and an e-group within the website.
The South Asia Urban Knowledge Hub, it's about regional cooperation within South Asia. So the NIUA is the regional coordinator for this hub. The focus is on advocacy through evidence-based research and emphasizing on innovations in sanitation. 4 countries that are participating in this exercise, that is Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal and India.
We started working on capacity building under the JNNURM, but that was more of a supportive role. Now we are embarking on a program where we will support the ministry in an overall all India training and capacity building program. So this is an exciting opportunity for us to guide the kinds of training material that is produced for capacity building of cities. Smart cities is going to be probably one of the central concerns of NIUA because it looks at smart management of cities. It looks at smarter technologies for cities and infrastructure in cities, issues of mobility, issues of services like water supply, sanitation, power and energy and renewable energy.
urban climate change resilience. When you say resilience, you mean that even if you have a flood or if you have drought or if you have extreme events, how do we cope with it? There is a lot of aspects of not only just science, there is planning, there is innovativeness. Somehow the smart city is kind of connected to this. Because when you say smart, you are not only talking about day-to-day life, but also you're talking about what can happen maybe once in 30 years.
We also help the ministry with the National Mission on Sustainable Habitat. We have proposed training 500 to 600 cities to bring them on board on climate change issues, because if we don't take care of climate change, we are going to be in a big mess.
We are also going to be involved with the sanitation mission, the housing mission, as well as the mission for the rejuvenation of 500 cities. NIUA has over the years developed a certain competence with a wide range of research subjects. We look forward now to focusing on the integration of a lot of these research interests so that we can support the idea of integrated, comprehensive and evidence-based planning of Indian cities.
I think we have been moving with the times. We have been diversifying activities as we move along. We remain as objective as possible in our academic and research work.
We are seeing a kind of generational change in the Institute. I see that as a great opportunity to realign ourselves, to also set a new kind of culture of working. I'm very keen that we develop a more collegiate, more collaborative and interactive framework. So these are all very timely and I would say path-breaking possibilities for us. And so it is an exciting time for NIUA.